तारण कृतान कलिंग वाञ्छान काम काञ्चन अतिनिन्दित इन्द्रिय त्यागे शार हे नार बार त्यागे शार हे नार बार देह पाने निर्भय गात संशय दृढ निश्चय मानस निष्कारण भक्त शरण निष्कारण भक्त शरण त्याजे जाते कुल संपद तव श्रीपाद भाव गोष्पाद बारिज प्रेमार पान समुदार शान प्रेमार पान समुदार शान जागो जान दुख जाय संपद तव श्रीपाद भाव पुष्पद वारिज थाय प्रेमार्पण समुदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समुदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनाथित नमो नमो मन वचनैकाधार प्रभु मन वचनैकाधार ज्योतिरज्योतिय जल हृदि कंदर ज्योतिरज्योतिय जल हृदि कंदर तुमि तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाकमनातीत मन वचनैकाधार प्रभु मन वचनैकाधार ज्योतिरज्योतियो जलहृदिकन्दर ज्योतिरज्योतियो जलहृदिकन्दर तुमि तम भञ्जनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भञ्जनहार लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंकुशंग मृदंग लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंकुशंग मृदंग गाइছে छंद कथा बृंद आरती তোমার গাইছে छंद कथा बृंद आरती তোমার जय जय आरती তোমার हर हर आरती তোমার शिव शिव आरती তোমার खंडन भाव बंधन जग बंदन बंदित गुरु महाराज की जय। ओम ह्रीं ऋतं तमोजल गुणाजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं देवां सकरुणां तव पादपद्मा मोहाङ्कषं बहुकृतं न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात्त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्त्रधृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात्त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ते तरसा तैत्रेतो तृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मार्तामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशं तस्मात्त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी स्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नमो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात्त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्व सर्वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गलमाङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानं शक्ति नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज की
Hello, check. Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraya Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So we start the next lecture of Vivekananda from this Jnana Yoga volume. It's called Maya and Freedom. The first several instances that he gives in this particular lecture again emphasize, but in very concrete practical terms, this situations of contradiction that define our life. So we'll start with the first paragraph and then come back to various things here. Trailing clouds of glory we come, says the poet. This is actually a quote from Wordsworth, and so this is the full poem here. But trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. This is by Wordsworth. Only this part, trailing clouds of glory we come, says the poet, is what Vivekananda says here. And he says, not all of us come as trailing clouds of glory, however. Some of us come as trailing black fogs. There can be no question about that. So, on the one hand, there is this very positive thing about the origins or the core of the human spirit, about this. And that's what this trailing clouds of glory means. On the other hand, there is darkness, and that's what Vivekananda alludes to here. Some of us come as trailing black fogs. There can be no question about that. But what's common? In a purely common sense way, that's what he illustrates next. But every one of us comes into this world to fight as on a battlefield. We come here weeping to fight our way as well as we can, and to make a path for ourselves through this infinite ocean of life. Forward we go, having long ages behind us and an immense expanse beyond. So on we go till death comes and takes us off the field, victorious or defeated, we do not know. And this is Maya. Two things, two sources of contradiction in human life being explicated here. One, the eternal irony of life as juxtaposed with death. One. Two, glory of our origins being juxtaposed with darkness. These two. Positive orientation and negative orientation towards various life situations. These two aspects, the tension between the positive and the negative, the tension between life and death, the tension between light and darkness, the essential contradictions that define our human life, trials, tribulations, and struggles. Let's take these up one by one and try to understand what exactly is being communicated here. This brings us back to a theme that we've stressed several times in this sequence of lectures, namely this irony when life itself is juxtaposed with death. All of us know as a theoretical fact that we are going to die. We see it all around us, so it's going to happen to us. But this does not cut deep into our awareness. Why? Just a few years back, there was an Israeli group of scientists at the Bar-Ilan University who came up with the finding that essentially when people are asked to examine death as a concept or as an idea, the instinctive reaction is to think of it as something that happens to other people, not to us. How did they do this? They actually devised an experiment. One, they had, essentially what they did was there's part of our brain which responds to this novelty, so to something new, something strange. So for instance, very simple thing. Suppose a string of pictures, all of an orange, are shown to you. The brain resides in some kind of equanimity without fluctuations. Then suddenly a picture of an apple comes and something in the brain triggers off, basically telling us this is something new that we are seeing. Then there's another part of the brain which essentially looks at something and attributes it to something outside without attributing it to oneself. So for instance, suppose somebody flashes a picture of oneself along with some characteristic one has. There's part of the brain again that triggers and says, oh yes, this is about me. There could be a series of those things, but suppose you have the same picture and then side by side some word connoting death or destruction, say grave or disease or death, and somehow or the other the brain immediately reacts to that and attributes it to the objective world outside. In other words, within our biological system, there is a mechanism that prevents us from grasping in total reality our own annihilation, our own death. We are not aware of this. We are not conscious of this. It is not something that is real to us. Our own death is not something that we can possibly grasp in its full reality. It remains a mystery, so to speak. Evolution has shaped us this way. Why? Because the thought of one's own destruction typically would give rise to morbidity and negativity in one's approach to life. This is really, so there would not be this notion of progress or movement or development. Why? Because at every time one would weigh this against the thought that, oh, none of this is going to last, so why should I put in the effort? In order to save ourselves from these negative thoughts, from these morbidities, our evolutionary system itself has shielded all animals, including human beings, from this thought of death as something that could possibly happen to oneself. And so, it is the one idea that brings up the fear of the unknown, this core essential fear, in its most manifest way. What do we do about it? I don't know if how many of you people who are listening to this have heard the first deep experience that Ramana Maharshi had was the following. At some point when he was a teenager, he got suddenly overcome by this tremendous fear of dying. Another part of his mind kicked in and said, all right, there is this death that is going to happen. And he kept quiet and calm and looked at this fear that had come to his mind almost as an object of experience rather than as something intrinsic to himself. And so the mind clearly grasped that yes, at death, this that we call my body is going to get extinguished. It's going to get annihilated. Then whatever remains is going to be burnt. But somehow or the other, the perceiver, the awareness on which this whole event, this whole fear appeared, that awareness, unconditioned by the body, remains. And so, if we are to trace this fear, who is fearful? I am fearful. What exactly is this I that is fearing its destruction? This query, this enquiry. This is frequently worded in the Vedantic literature as who am I? But this is really what it means. Who is it who is experiencing this? What exactly is the nature of this awareness? And pursue that enquiry as a one-pointed thing till the objects in terms of which it is conditioned vanishes. So he really thought of his own death as the destruction of this body and mind, which we are accustomed to calling I. But then the mind recoils to its natural state of quiescence, of quietness, and asks itself, okay, I can see the destruction of this body and mind, which I, for day-to-day life, call my I. But somehow or the other, I can actually witness its destruction as a concrete thought. Then, who is it that is perceiving all this? And the mind releases its hold on this limited psychophysical organism which one is accustomed to calling I. And then, since one has understood death in very concrete, real terms, its fear goes away. It's no longer an unknown. And one sees very clearly that life and death are the obverse and reverse of this changeful world that we see in front of us all the time. The same question comes up in a very poetic way in the Kathopanishad. Nachiketa asks Yama that it is, many say that after death everything is gone. And many say that no, something lives on after that. What is true in all this? That was his question. And various traditions, various religious traditions, have come up with various stories to address this specific existential crisis that comes to the minds of some people, particularly when they come face to face with the death of somebody one loves. And the stories range from how people are going to stay in their coffins till Judgment Day to the more Eastern notion of rebirth. That no, this I as an individual am not going to get destroyed. But here's the point that the point of Nachiketa's question is that, look, these are really stories. What is concretely true about this? Yama does not answer the question in terms of these stories. The real essence of the Kathopanishad is essentially Yama taking this question of Nachiketa as the starting point and then pursuing the inquiry, not in terms of anecdotes, not in terms of Pauranic stories, not in terms of theology, but in terms of a serious, earnest inquiry into what is changeful and what is changeless. In fact, he offers various worldly enjoyments to Nachiketa, whose response is Shwabhava Martyasya Yadanta Kaitat Sarvendriyanam Jarayanti Teja Api Sarvam Jivitam Alpameva Tavaiva Baha Tava Nritya Gite. Shwabhava. Shwa. Shwa, that word means tomorrow. It's this, the SH, not the S. Shwabhava. Shwo, it's not Swabhava, it's Shwabhava. Shwabhava Martyasya Yadanta Kaitat Sarvendriyanam Jarayanti Teja Api Sarvam Jivitam Alpameva Tavaiva Baha Tava Nritya Gite. All these phenomenal things and the joys they bring are ephemeral. They come today and go away. They drain our energies through the senses. So I do not want these sources through which my energies are exhausted. What do I want? I want the truth of this life versus death, this core puzzle that faces thoughtful people. And Yama's answer is based on this analysis. Shreyascha preyascha manushyameta tau avidhyayan vivinakti dhiraha. See, when that which is pleasant for us, conducive to propagating and maintaining and developing our existence as individuated, embodied beings, that which is pleasant can be expanded into this idea. When this pleasant and the prayer, that which is really more fundamental, more fundamentally covetable, when these two come and present them to the individual mind, then that the person who is looking at them analyzes and discriminates and picks out from them that which is going to conduce to permanent good. A proper answer, not a forgetfulness of this problem of life and death. This is the fundamental problem, this fundamental irony that faces us. It's not turning one's face away from that, but rather looking at it face to face and going into it to understand what this dichotomy really means. What is it in us that is fearing annihilation? Essentially, this enquiry, not at the level of an intellectual idea, but at the level of a deep understanding which conditions our outlook on life. That's what this question really is going to lead to. What is it in us that is not conditioned by time itself? When we are asking about something that is permanent, something that is not destructible, then we are really asking the equally fundamental question: what is it in us? What is it in our makeup, our constitution, that lies beyond the thraldom of time itself? In a different place, a few paragraphs down, Vivekananda is going to define Maya as this threefold method by which we grasp reality: time, space, and causation. But these fundamental structures are really aspects of our mind, foundational aspects of our mind, but aspects of our mind nevertheless. So the question subjectively becomes equivalently: how does the notion of time arise in our mind? Whether one wants to think of life versus death in an intensely personal context, or whether one is asking the question, how does time arise in my consciousness? One is really asking the same question. Time in Sanskrit is called kala. Yeah? It is also used for death. Why? Because some change that appears in the context of time is bound to go down in time after a while. The first is called birth, the second is called death. At each moment, we are being born and we are dying. Thoughts emerge in our consciousness. They fly around, they float around like clouds in a sky for a while, and then they vanish. Our thoughts are being born and the thoughts are dying. This notion of I am this individuated being, at its foundation, is just such a thought. It has emerged and we have nurtured it. So such a thought must of necessity die. So whether one is inquiring into the problem of death and versus life, whether one is inquiring into the fundamental structure of time as perceived by the subject, one is really doing the same inquiry. Where does this, say another version, which is what Raman Maharshi popularized, is where does this notion of I come from? What is behind this I? In different aspects, the same question from different perspectives. A foundational question, and so Yama's answer in the Kathopanishad to Nachiketa is a foundational answer to this foundational question. Essentially encouraging this young boy. Yeah, he's very happy. I mean, Tadrik no bhuya nachiketa prashta. May we have inquirers like you who want to understand something very deeply, fundamentally. Yeah? Not in terms of stories, not in terms of some anecdotes written in some book, but what is it really that answers our questions fundamentally, that gives us satisfaction as something that is true, not a narrative, but a truth, not a story, but a truth. And for that, we really have to be in a position to inquire into the depths of our consciousness, where these contradictory ideas of life versus death, of good versus evil, of light versus darkness, of yes versus no, all these ideas, where in us do they arise from? And these contradictions are all in the background of space and time, and this cause and effect relationship which binds it together. Where in our consciousness does this notion of time itself arise? If we are to get at the foundation of this mystery that we call life, then the answer to that question must be sought in our consciousness itself. Where does this notion of time itself arise? This is the fundamental theme, these deep, basic questions that we typically turn our face away from. Questions that we would much rather forget. This dichotomy that defines our life, we would much rather forget. These contradictions which define our life, we would much rather forget. Choice becomes one between one of a pair of opposites, either optimism or pessimism. Neither is the solution. Not an emotional response, but an ardent inquiry into the truth that underlies these contradictions. That is the quest towards which these examples of contradiction that occur in this lecture, Maya and Freedom, that fundamental reality on which these contradictions are based, is what is the goal of this enquiry. Before finishing today, let me just read one more paragraph and leave you with the thought. Hope is dominant in the heart of childhood. The whole world is a golden vision to the opening eyes of the child. He thinks his will is supreme. As he moves onward, at every step, nature stands as an adamantine wall, barring his future progress. He may hurl himself against it again and again, striving to break through. The further he goes, the further recedes the ideal, till death comes and there is release, perhaps. And this is Maya. Again, here he contrasts these two things, hopefulness and hopelessness, optimism and pessimism. And again, the pointer is to the background, the reality on which these contradictory attitudes, one of optimism, one of pessimism, arise. They float on this consciousness which is untouched by either optimism or pessimism. This consciousness one is trying to get at is the truth. You can call it tattva, you can call it shunya, you can call it what you will. It's not a thing. It's not an object of our awareness. It's based on a capacity that all of us have, a capacity to abstract out something that is common to different experiences. Say, for instance, the number 2. Do we see the number 2 outside anywhere? Do we see the number 3 outside anywhere? No. We see 3 people, 3 fans, 3 chairs. The number 3 is the common abstraction of 3 objects of any kind. So this is something that not just us as humans, even dogs do it. Yeah? This capacity for abstraction is there in each one of us. It's the one tool that we have of knowledge. And so, here the supreme abstraction is being directed, is being pointed to. What is the common substratum of all my individual experiences? What is that substratum on which all these experiences are united and held together? That common abstraction is being sought for. Because space, time, and causation is something that is inseparably intertwined with all experience. But what is it that supports it? What is it in us that helps us see space? What is it in us that helps us perceive time? Where is it? Where is it in our hearts that we detect something as unreal and detect something else as unreal, as something as real, something else as unreal? All these contradictory notions of speech, yes versus no, true versus false, hope versus futility, life versus death. What is the substratum of all these contradictions? These lectures, this particular lecture, which is the culmination of his Maya lectures, points us in that direction, an enquiry towards that. So we shall hopefully take this up again next time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.